Um, welcome. So I have some notes on my phone. So when you see me looking at my phone, I'm not checking my email or anything like that. So anyway, I want to say I'm grateful for the opportunity to teach this class, and it should be a different kind of experience for me because in my 20 plus years of teaching, the average age of my students was about 20. So I imagine that I'll get a different kind of reaction or something like that. But there won't be any tests or uh, grades, of course. Uh, this particular subject is exciting to me, and it's something that just going over it is inspiring. And I've been talking about it, teaching about it for years. And so there's a little story I want to give. What I want to do this morning is give a little background, give you an idea of where I'm coming from, and then also a few introductory remarks. Welcome. Hi. Hello. Hi. Hey. Numbers have swelled. I want to think everybody's on the other side of the bridge. They're here because of nonviolent. But anyway, so a little history of the class and my interest in the class. I'll wait till you get settled down. Is your name Lynn?
My name is Anna.
Anna.
Yes.
Flores.
Yes.
Okay, I remember we had to talk. So about 12 years ago, I was teaching a seminar for a unit in Arizona State called the Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict. And a lecturer came to my class to give his experience, named Dennis Dalton. And he taught at Barnard College and next to Columbia for 40 years. And he taught Gandhi and the political philosophy of Indian political philosophy. And so his lecture in my class was just really inspiring. So I talked to him about studying with him. So I got a grant to go up. He was living in Portland at the time, and I went up there and I spent the summer, and he basically gave me his class. So a lot of this comes from him. And then my wife and I loved Portland so much. When I retired, we moved there until 5 years ago. My granddaughter had a baby here, so I had to stay. Yes, I'm glad to be here. But so when I talked to Dennis, and he told me about the Fromm Institute. He taught here for years. He said, check it out. So here I am. That was so. Anyway, so the original title for this class that wasn't used by the institute was the promise of nonviolence and the seeds of freedom. And this is the story of what I look at as the beginning of nonviolence as a political strategy. And Gandhi really basically, you want to say, invented it. It's not totally unique, but he invented what later, as we'll talk about, was carried on by the civil rights movement, the leaders of the civil rights movement in the United States. The story, it's a reminder, I think. One of the things that I think it's important, I feel like it's an important class to give, is because we often forget that an important part of a democracy is protesting unjust laws. The Declaration of Independence, in case I just want to quote it, says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men or all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying down its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such a form as to them shall seem most likely to affect safety, happiness, and prudence." So in other words, United States was founded on an objection to unjust laws. I'm not telling you everything you haven't heard before, but I think we forget. And, and it's the nature of governments to become established and then lose their ideals or become crystallized, and periodically there is protest, and it's part of this class is about those moments in history. And most of you, I'm sure, remember the 50s and 60s when this, and that's part of my inspiration. When I was 15, a friend of mine dropped out of school and joined the Congress on Racial Equality, and I went to a protest at the state capitol in Arizona State University. And remember, we went into the rotunda and people were holding hands singing, "We Shall Overcome." I was just like, I was 15. I went, this is amazing. And so people were sitting in on the steps, and the police tried to remove them and accidentally kicked someone. And they carried her away. And the headline in the next paper was "Violence at the State House." And I'm 15. I'm going, I didn't see real violence, but anyway. So but these are sentiments. This idea of protesting unjust laws, these are sentiments out of British political philosophy. And Gandhi learned them as a part of being a British citizen. But his methods of nonviolence or non-cooperation was basically Gandhi's invention, you might say. But this is not really what we'd call passivity. And that's something I want to emphasize in this class. Is people say, well, yeah, let's all be nonviolent. But that's not really what they were doing. It's a strategic confrontation with power to expose violence and bigotry that is behind the violation of the principles of equality and freedom. So when injustice exists, it's usually backed up by violence. And so, but as you'll see with the British Empire and with the American South, well, America throughout the first half of the 20th century, is that there was a sense that things were peaceful. The British were benevolent. We're bringing civilization to everyone. Hooray! But just try to challenge that, or in the South, especially with Jim Crow. Well, Negroes are very happy here. They smile. Well, they better smile. And of course, we know the history. But so part of one of the principles, one of the principles I think is a really important one from this class, and that's the idea of structural violence. And I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but structural violence is the idea that the structure of the laws and the social practices are enforced by violence, and so it's within the structure of it. So it doesn't have to be direct violence in doing it yet, but it becomes this. So part of the nonviolent action that in Gandhi and then and Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement is to come up to confront those structures and those laws and bring out the violence that is latent in it. And by doing that, another important part of this strategy is mass media. So as we'll see, Gandhi, next week we'll watch there's a short film on his salt march, if you're familiar with that. Even if you are, it's still in. So basically, when he marched to the sea to make salt illegally, it was illegal to make salt, and you had to pay a tax in order to buy salt. By Indian salt, Indians had to pay a tax to the British. And so Gandhi said, I'm going to go make salt. And he had photojournalists follow him the whole way. as he walked to the seat. It was broadcast. You know, they read it into the congressional record, stuff like that. So it's important not just to say I'm going to be nonviolent or I'm going to protest unjust laws, but it has to be broadcast. You know, the world has to. You're exposing this violence which is behind the injustice. So, let's see.
Your television into that.
What's that?
It seems like the birth of television brought home to everyone around
Yes.
the world.
Yes.
How the violence was. Otherwise, you just kind of heard about it.
Yeah.
And as you said with the headline in the paper, violence, where there wasn't any violence.
Yeah.
How do you deal with it?
Well, and what Gandhi did, and so Gandhi was involved, and we'll get into this, but Gandhi was involved at a time at the turn of the century when film became popular, newsreels, 1920s. So they filmed them. Oh, before the next movie feature, here's Gandhi walking to the seat of me, and here's people getting their heads knocked for trying to do it. And see, or even more famously, you probably remember when in Birmingham, we'll see this too, protesting the denial of Black people to register to vote. The policeman in Birmingham, Bull Connor, used attack dogs. They used batons and hit people. They used these fire hoses that would strip the bark off a tree. And they took pictures of it, and it was on the cover of the Russian newspaper. And when that happened, the Kennedys were, it's a very, very sensitive topic. If they would have said, yes, let's get civil rights, the whole South, Democratic Party ruled the South. And anyway, and we'll get into that. So it's key to this, so it's not just, someone came to look at my class and they went, I'm all for nonviolence. That's great. Well, that's not really exactly what we're talking about. But part of what Gandhi says too, and this is also key, is, and we'll talk about this later, but the whole idea of what he called self-suffering. So we're not there to inflict suffering on other people, but our bodies are what was demonstrate the violence, which is hidden, and that in itself is a moral statement, But it takes, and another thing too is that the courage of these people is incredible, and we'll watch it. People who have confront the powers of the British Empire, to confront the powers of the policemen in the United States takes incredible courage. And so we'll talk about how these people developed this kind of what I would call a spiritual foundation. Anyway, so I'll wrap this up and then I can ask. So let's see. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Before we get into this, and this is a different dynamic than I thought, when very few people signed up, they offered me the chance not to have to teach it, but I want to teach it anyway. It's my first time to teach, and I think the best way to advertise my teaching is to do it. So, but I want to have, there's a few ground rules that I'd want to put forth for the class. And 20-year-olds really need that too. But so there's a lot of material here. So I really want to encourage discussion and thought about these ideas, the material, but because we have more opportunity to engage in a focused discussion. But even though I would appreciate it if you saved your comments pretty much till the last. If you have some ideas to clarify, that's important. But as far as the discussion, if you want to engage a discussion about a particular idea, if you'd bring some paper with you and make a note, because at the end of the class, I'd like to reserve that for discussion after it's all otherwise, we're not going to get to the end of the material. And and the kind of questions you have will be ongoing issues. So if you have a question that we didn't get to, you want to talk about something this one week, we can move it to a next week. But there's a lot of material. I have two films that are both about 25 minutes long. And then we're going to see, I think it's important to see Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, which I taught to every semester to my classes, even my, not, I watched it 100 times. It still gives me goosebumps. And anyway, so let's see. Also, during our discussion, I would expect that people would have respect for one another, even if we disagree. Also, it is my responsibility to make sure that we stay on topic and that if we stray too far off subject, someone feels compelled to elaborate their opinions or feelings about a particular situation. Again, it's my responsibility to limit it or redirect the discussion. So don't take it personally if I just say stop it or something like. I won't say that, but I'll be more gentle than that. Yeah, and it's such a tense political situation now that it invites, a lot of them. There's a lot of emotion around a lot of issues, and so yeah, we want to limit it pretty much. And I want to be able to explore how that might fit into our current day situation, because there are some. I would personally think there's a certain level of injustice going on and potential injustices. But again, it's a part of a democratic society. This year of the election coming up, it's not just about voting, it's about being citizens and being able to confront that in one way or another. So any questions about what I've said so far? Any comments? It's clear. Yeah. So let's set the stage for Gandhi's transformation. And this is how I want to frame this. It's transformation from being a loyal citizen. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Well, to an activist committed to ending British rule. And I want to start with a question. How did a small country like England create an empire that stretched around the world? It's amazing, really, when you think about it. Just a little bit of history. I don't have any slides for this. So what's called the East India Company was established in 1600, basically to create trade routes in India and in Southeast Asia. And so it originally was the routes that were established by the Spanish and the Portuguese. And the Spanish and Portuguese ran in some trouble as far as their financial situation. But the British had a number of pirates that worked, and they would loot these treasure chests, and it started to increase their power and so they came to dominate those trade routes, and so India, Southeast Asia, and they came to control large parts of that, and they Hong Kong, and at one point, soon after that, they were the largest corporation in the world. They had 260,000 soldiers, twice the size of the British Army. So here's a commercial endeavor that started to build up this, I don't know, shadow government. I don't know if you would, but let me see. So the way that the Great Britain established the empire on which the sun never set, in 1900, there are 250 million Indians and 41 million Englishmen. So again, 41 million Englishmen, you know, a six and a quarter times as many people in India, and yet they ruled over that, plus so much of Southeast Asia as well. Yeah, and in 1600, there were 4 million Englishmen and 105 million Indians. So you can see a question. It's like, how did that happen? How did so few people get to the point where they could rule over that many people? And here's a couple things that my friend shared with me. My friend Dennis Dalton. What they did, of course, they developed a technology and a way of creating an infrastructure that showed people that they were, when they would arrive at a new territory, they were so impressed they could build an infrastructure, roads. They had and a certain proof that they were superior. There's a poem somewhere, I couldn't find it, but where it talks about how, the British men ate meat. And so they were towering over, they come to India and everybody, nobody was anywhere close to the size of the British. And so they just impressed them in that way. So, and many of the indigenous people, they thought that they were superior in some way. They also, once they established a trade route, they would, if there were local leaders that were uncooperative, they would kill them. Or they would also bestow honors on them. They would say, you can be a part of my government. You can be a part of my company, and I'll give you epaulets on your suit, and I'll put your name in the paper. And so that way, this was one way that they would ingratiate themselves. So at that point, there was also this British idea that let me get this idea of the white man's burden. You heard that? There's a poem by Rudyard Kipling about that. And it reflects in a lot of ways. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it reflects in a lot of ways the British attitude toward their mission to civilize the world, right? So White Man's Burden was from 1899. It says, "Take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, the new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Take up the wet man's burden in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride by open speech and simple, as 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain." So we're here to enrich them. And this is the last one I'll read. He goes, "Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease." So we're here to feed the people and end their sicknesses. "And when your goal is nearest, an end for others sought, watch sloth and heathen folly, bring hope of all your hopes to naught." So, they're not going to appreciate us. We're going to do this. We bring in them all this stuff, and that's our burden, is we're here and they're ungrateful, they're ignorant, they're foolish, but we got to do it because that's. So anyway, so into this, where am I? To the situation where, the white man is obviously superior, comes Gandhi. Hello. He's over there somewhere. Gandhi is born. All right. It's not working. Okay.
You want me to go to the front office?
Yeah, if you could find, see if I can try it. I don't know. The wrong touch. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
He's coming.
What's that?
He's coming.
Okay.
it happens.
Oh, okay.
It's not.
Help.
Saw you, Professor, I saw you.
No, I know it's not me. Malfunction. So let's see. Okay.
Try it now, try your clicker. Looks.
Okay.
And then go toward.
Go back.
There you go.
Okay. All right.
Hey, everyone. This is one of my favorite people in the world. This is my uncle's aunt Anna.
Really? So you're the one. Okay. I heard about you.
We've known each other for 30 years or so.
Oh, my.
Enjoy class.
Yeah, well,
Uncle's what?
My husband's aunt.
I thought you said your uncle's aunt.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misstated.
yeah, you look too young to be that. Anyway, so the situation that the Indians have established, and so Gandhi was born in this. Hello. October 2nd, 1869, in Porbandar, in Western India. His father was a chief minister of the city and a very able administrator. But one of the things that we see is that where he's born is really in the outskirts. He's not really at the center of power. So someone told me that for him to be a leader of India, coming from a place like that, would be like President of the United States coming from South Dakota. So it's just, it's not an area of power. So he had that against, but he used it eventually because it showed that he was of the common people. He wasn't out of the regular power structure. So he was married at 13, as was the custom. Of course, stayed married until his wife passed away. And so then, let's see. Okay. There's Gandhi, the British citizen. He's very proud of it and isn't really, his mother's is a very religious Hindu. But he's not that interested, and he's more enamored with English tradition. He's reading, he goes to London, he takes violin lessons and dancing lessons. He joins vegetarian group. He goes and he's much a seeker. So he joins a Christian discussion group. He starts. He meets George Bernard Shaw. He begins to go to meetings also with a theosophist. Any of you familiar with theosophy? So theosophists, people like Madame Blavatsky. Have you ever heard of Madame Blavatsky and Annie Besant? Who this is an organization who believed that all religion had the same message, that it was a universal. They called it the perennial philosophy. So he was very interested in that. So exploring various forms. First time the Bhagavad Gita which is a major Hindu text. The first time he ever read it was in an English translation. He's very much a part of and his goal is to become a respectable British citizen, and then take his he went to law school, got his law degree, and decided he would go back to India, start a practice. Nope, we're not there yet, but he goes to India and isn't very successful. So he's there for almost 2 years, and it just doesn't get off the ground. But he gets a call to go to South Africa, where he's to help. I think he had a Muslim client who had some problems with copyright or something like that. But as he settled into to practice law there, he began to realize that things were very unfair. And he found that the Indian community was discriminated against in ways that kind of shocked him. Let's see, what's the next one? Oop. Hello. And yet, as a British citizen, a good British citizen, he volunteers to lead ambulance drivers in the Boer War, the war against the Dutch settlers in South Africa. And he at the same time he's flooding the government with lawsuits against the discrimination that he found. So, and one of the things that he did throughout his life was he established a farm. He called a farm. Are you too cold? Would you like to heat it up a little bit? Oh, well, we'll to find someone to do that. Sorry. And he became a real thorn in the side of the South African government because he used the law to confront these kind of injustices, which was kind of a revelation to him. And part of what he was doing too was the things that he learned, the disciplines he learned as far as his vegetarianism, which he practiced always, but also his idea of inclusion. So one of the things that he did for the Indian community was, so it's a community called, at first, this first one was called the Phoenix Farm, established in 1904. And he invited untouchables to join his community, or they called them Dalits at the time. And so part of service and discipline was to not only include them, but to take turns cleaning their latrines. And so if you know anything about the caste system, that was, I mean, to walk in the shadow of an untouchable was considered unclean, let alone cleaning their toilets. And so there's a scene. How many of you saw the movie Gandhi? Anyone? Yeah. Yeah. So there's a scene in there, and this is also part of his discipline, was that he decided that he was going to begin to clean their toilets as part of his practice, because that idea of, he was against the caste system, which was really very un-Hindu, but he ordered his wife to help him do that. And she was outraged that he would expect that, because that was considered awful, but he insisted on it. And he was angry with her. And in the movie, you can see that he tried to force her to do it. And she said, don't you have any respect? And there was a conflict, but she ended up doing that. So part of what he's doing is to practicing. I mean, and one of the things that he was famous for, people would say, they would come to him with a problem, and he'd say, well, let me think about what I think you should do. And he knew what they needed to do, but he had to practice it himself first. And so, he gave away all his good. One of his main supporters, who was South African, I don't have his name right here, but he was quite wealthy, and they were taking a ship to India one time, and his friend Ketterman, I think is his name. He had bought an expensive pair of binoculars, and he was showing to Gandhi, and Gandhi said, riches are really part of the problem. Part of our discipline is to give that up. And so what I want you to do is throw them overboard. And he wasn't very happy about that, but that's what he did. So he was a strict taskmaster in that way, but he didn't do anything. He didn't expect anyone to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. But his, so the Phoenix Farm in 1904 was his laboratory for developing these things, not only for him, but for his followers, because he would need them in order to confront power structures in South Africa. So let's see. So another volunteer, there's the Zulu uprising. So the indigenous group in South Africa. And he organized a group of supporters to be stretcher bearers. And what he saw firsthand was the brutality of the British against the natives. And again, it wasn't too much of a stretch to see that the British attitude toward the indigenous people and the people who were not white was abhorrent to him. And kind of he became disillusioned in ways that he didn't expect. And this is really important key. Because he was brought up in this British idea, like I talked about before, where people were, the British had the highest morality. They had the highest sense of dignity, and they were here to enhance the life of the rest of the world. But in fact, in the process, they were brutalizing. They were greedy. They were all the things that he was frankly shocked. But again, it was the beginning of this whole experience. He was in South Africa for 21 years before he actually went back to India. Let's see. So one event that you would see in the movie too, but this is a clip that's not Gandhi, that's Ben Kingsley there. And so the British passed again what came to be known as, what's that?
Noticing they're all wearing Western clothes, not Indian clothes, but I didn't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, well, he's still wearing Western clothes, right? Exactly. This is some support. He maintains a sense of being British, right? And that's part. And he feels like, well, I can work. I can confront the British from inside. And so it was called the Black Act of 1906, which all Indians and other non-white people had to register. And Gandhi said, well, that doesn't seem fair. And of course, it was a way to monitor them, to control them. And he saw that. So what he did was he held a rally, or him and some other people. No, it wasn't a huge it wasn't a huge turnout, but he had a big basket, an iron basket with a fire in it, and he took the registration cards and he threw it in. And as soon as he did that, the police came and beat him with a club. And so anybody he would in the movie, he would, because the idea was he collected them in a basket and he was going to throw them all in. And so they knocked him down, and he was down on the ground, and he kept putting them in there, and they kept beating him. They threw him in jail. And he was in jail several times. And so this was not as well publicized, but it did get a small mention in the Indian paper. But again, he's another step toward his disillusionment in terms of the benevolence of the British Empire and his own becomes a personal experience. There's also an episode in the movie where he bought a ticket to ride the train, and it was in the first class because he could afford it. And there was a person who was sharing his his room, his uh, seat, a little room that he had on the train. And he looked in and he saw Gandhi and he goes, I'm not sitting next to a colored person. And so he ordered, he went and talked to the conductor, and the conductor said, you're gonna have to move to first class. Gandhi said, well, I'm not gonna do that because I've got to buy a ticket. He says, well, if you don't, I'm gonna throw you. And they threw him off the train. And so these things, talk about disillusionment. The great British Empire is going, okay. So again, he just extends his practice, and he's gaining more and more followers who have committed themselves to this kind of social action. And in order to do that, there had to be a regimen of discipline. And again, it was required that in order to participate in this kind of social action, that you needed to have discipline, because you will be beaten, you will be harassed, you will be put in jail. And so this is the beginning of his development of his technique and his strategies, but also as an important part of that whole method, there has to be discipline. And that's why, in a lot of ways, when we talk about, people demonstrating nowadays, and they're protesting this, protesting that, the organization is not necessarily there. Strategy isn't necessarily there. The discipline to confront, and when you do confront power, is it's more than just having a placard and marching. Anyway, so so he takes a trip to, how much time? You're supposed to take a break at some point, right? Or is that? Oh, we have till, yeah, okay, 11:40, is that right? Oh, yeah, okay, you got a lot of time.
Do the break whenever you want.
Okay. If there was official break or something like that.
You'll hear
Okay, okay. So he's in the process of developing philosophy of how do we want to confront the British Empire? And through his experiments in his ashrams, through his experiments in social action, he developed a philosophy that he wrote up on a trip back. He visited India, and eventually he went there. Backing up a little bit, he went there originally it was supposed to be temporary, but he was so enmeshed, became very successful in South Africa, that he sent for his family. So he took up residence there, of course. And so he's traveling back and forth between India and South Africa. And on one of his trips, he wrote this piece called Hind Swaraj, or Indian Home Rule. And again, it's his proclamation of what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. And I think what's interesting is, I want to talk about this. So this is a little chart here where he, in a real sense, is denouncing British rule and British values that he was acculturated in. And now because of his experiences in South Africa, has decided he's going to, that there's a good reason why he's going against what it is. And also that, in a way, Indian civilization is superior, he says. Not only are we inferior, but we're superior to them. And here's the difference. So, and Hind is, short for, the Indian group. Well, one of the things it's kind of an interesting sidelight. It's getting pretty cold in here. When the British came into any culture, they would ask people, what's your religion? And people went, what are you talking about? Because religion is really a Western concept. There's no real separation between, it's like, oh, this is our religion. This is our life. So if you look at Indian culture, there was many different manifestations, many different gods, many different practices. And so the British said, oh, we'll just call it Hinduism because Hind, it was just like India, the river Indus River. And Swaraj,
I'm gonna change that.
yes, thank you. I was ready to build a fire in them. I mean, it's cold.
The top of a pot, so I think.
I don't know what is you can't,
At the beginning, it's too cold.
you can't do it? Okay, well, should we take a break? Why don't we take a break? And then we'll warm it up, and when it's warm, you can come back. So I'm sorry about that. What's your name? Miriam? Welcome, hi. We're freezing in here.
It's not gonna change. This is part of Fromm. It's not gonna change.
People? Okay, we're gonna go ahead regardless. All right, so, again, Gandhi on that trip back from India to South Africa, put down his philosophy and his rationale, you might say, for confronting the British Empire. I want to go through it with you and we'll talk about it. So again, he contrasts Indian civilization, which he says is superior, and also labels it as female virtues. So he's very influenced by his mother, and he got a lot of his spiritual discipline from his mother, and he's saying there's something missing in Western civilization, and it's the feminine. So, and the Western civilization he characterizes as inferior. I mean, he just turns it on its head, whereas the British come and go, it's our duty to take care of you because you're so wild and immoral. And he goes, no, I've seen you. So I want to contrast them, step by step. So he says, essentially, our approach is nonviolent. Now, again, we can argue this, but this is what he puts down. And the concept is ahimsa, which means basically without violence, without aggression. So he says that, at the height of Hindu thought and is the idea of allowing what is to be. And we'll talk about that a little, but so, to not interfere, to interfere with the natural order of things is a form of violence. And so feminine is receptive. How do we nurture things? How do we, the way to improve things is not to rule over them. So the British, he says, is violence. We want to change things. You don't go along with you, we'll kill you, we'll beat you up. We'll embarrass you. We'll pull rank on you, we'll humiliate you. This is how we do it, and he goes, no, that's so we're excluding that from our philosophy. And what we use, and again, is what he called soul force. And you hear this in later on in Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches. He uses the idea of soul force. And the word he uses satyagraha. Satyagraha. I can't say it very well. It literally means there are two Sanskrit words. Satya means truth or truth means what is. So it's not just, truth isn't like some idea. Truth is what's presenting to you in reality. And to find that and to know it is a task. It's a spiritual task because it's hidden. It's hidden among, so it's not something that just presents itself to you. It's something that's part of the discipline. And graha means to cling to. So to cling to the truth, to cling to what is to not interfere with that. So, and we'll see how that becomes the soul, the force that he's using, he says. And, of course, Western civilization, he calls brute force. Indian civilization is Dharma. Again, Dharma is this the unfolding of what is. So this idea that there is a truth that shows itself in reality. And it's not something that is your mind, it's something, your opinion. It's an experience of what is. And again, that's something that has to be developed, that has to be understood through the discipline. And then he sees Western civilization, in spite of its claims to religious superiority, as irreligious and immoral. And later on, he talks about it being hedonistic and materialistic. He has no illusions about whatever, in whatever Christian kinds of propaganda they used. Again, for Indian values that he sees as self-control against Swaraj, which means Raj is ruling the Raj, and Swaraj is oneself. So he uses that on two levels, and he says basically they're the same process. So self-rule, as far as Indian rule of itself, is Swaraj. But in order to do that, you have to have self-rule of oneself. So he says, the only way for us to have freedom is for us to develop rule over ourselves. So we're not controlled by greed. We're not controlled by fear. Otherwise, they've got us because their brute force is so convincing, and it has kept us captive. And he'll say later on, he said, the British didn't take India from us. We gave it to them. We gave it to them through our fear and through our greed for materialistic things. They've seduced us into these values that are Western, which are no prize. They're our downfall. And so we're a captive, we're prisoners, but we've put ourselves there. And then, again, discipline, especially sexual discipline. And this is something that he emphasizes in I think it's 1906. He takes a vow of chastity, comes to his wife and says, "We're not having sex anymore." He goes, "I don't know what she said, but she took that vow with him." And so it's a recognition, I think, and it's as you probably all realize, the power of sexual, the sexual drive is so easily manipulated, and and we'll see in the life of Martin Luther King Jr. That was something he had trouble with, and it made him very vulnerable to control. Although anyway. So again, contrasting with Western civilization, the anger, the lust, domination. And then ultimately the goal is, he says, it's spiritual liberation, which is called moksha. And he says the ultimate goal, the ultimate result of Western civilization is to be enslaved by sex and money. And, and all of that is about power, isn't it? So he says that this is the core. This is so idealistic. And I think as we discuss it, it's pretty clear to me that, and that as an ideal, can you imagine a culture where everyone is so disciplined that they're not easily manipulated by money or power or sex? So, another question for this class is, is it at all useful? Is it just a dream that is, it's a fantasy, or can it actually work? And my thesis is that it needs to be an integral part of any democratic system. So there has to be some element there, some element that we can access as a part of the process. So again, we're never gonna, and Gandhi and King both had this feeling that they were able to establish certain changes, and they didn't totally revolutionize the culture. And Pakistan existed, and there's still racial inequality, but was there progress? Anyway, so that's a question. Let's see. So I want to stop there for a minute. Let me go ahead and finish this one. So he continues, is one of his last campaigns was to address the working conditions of people in the mines that were all indigenous people, and very disorganized. And so, but at the same time, this was a series of events that he engineered, and the South African government, was tired of putting him in jail. They were tired of his suits that he brought as a lawyer, and so they basically said to him, "Time for you to leave." And he felt that it was time too. So so the end of his stay in South Africa was 1915, and then you can see he's adopted more of an Indian lifestyle through his affirmation of Indian values, his whole idea of that discipline. I want to go back to these other this particular car right there. I think that's what I'm going, right? Let me go to this one. Sorry about that. Yeah, okay. So again, just as a review, these are some of the core values that he developed over time. So ahimsa, so doing no harm in action or thought, nonviolence. So nonviolence is truth. How can nonviolence be equated with truth? That's a question. Any thoughts about that? Gets back to this idea of truth as being what is, and violence in some ways is a way of trying to control what is, trying to stop what is, trying to attach oneself to what is, and thereby modifying it and changing it and distorting it. And so by nonviolence, one is in a paradoxical way exposing what violence is. So violence in itself is disruptive to what is. And so nonviolence, in a sense, again, like I was saying, it reveals the violence that is behind the control of and the manipulation of truth. Does that make any sense? Yes, sir.
So non-violence then would be the means by which they would change what is, rather than
That's-
violence?
That's part of it. That's the first part is to confront violence with nonviolence. And so what that does, it exposes, to confront violence is to say, okay, I'm not going to go ahead. The truth is that you're suppressing you are being violent against truth. And so I'm going to manifest truth, which is I'm going to disobey this law. I'm not going to cooperate with your power. What are you going to do about it? Well, I'm going to have to arrest you. I'm going to have to beat you. And so therefore, that first of all exposes the violence, the immorality, that which disrupts the truth, if that makes sense. And so that's the first step. So satyagraha is so holding to that truth. It's an active civil resistance. So it's first of all, not cooperation or breaking the law. So these things demonstrate that, and it brings out the latent violence. And so the injustice assumes that there's a truth. So if we're all equal, and I'm asking you to pay a tax to buy salt, but I don't have to do that. You're going to have to register and be on file in my files, but I don't have to. So that's so part of truth is a sense of equality. Like it says in the Declaration of Independence, these truths are self-evident that everyone is created equal. If I come in and say we're not equal, and I create a society where we're not equal, I'm going against the truth. And so for me to demonstrate equality, to hold to the sense that we are equal, is to show that the only way that you can keep this order is through violence. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions about that? It's an important point to this because it really demonstrates the method, because it is a method. It requires discipline, it requires planning. And so the other thing is, in this part, is self-suffering. So one's body becomes the site to which the injustice is demonstrated. So I'm going to behave like I'm equal, and you're going to hit me for it. You're going to put me in jail. My body becomes, so I'm suffering that. In order for me to do that, I have to have a foundation. I have to have I have to have self-rule. I have to rule myself so that your violence toward me doesn't affect me. It doesn't stop me from holding to that truth of our equality. So I'm demonstrating by self-suffering. But importantly, again, with Gandhi and the civil rights movement, is that I'm going to have people take movies of me suffering. And I'm going to show everyone to the world. I'm going to unveil your violence. I'm going to unveil your cruelty. I'm going to unveil the hypocrisy, what you're talking about. You're talking about equality. You're not about equality. You're talking about freedom. No, it's a show, so if that makes sense. So again, those three basic principles are key to this whole. So I want to just stop there. Hold on a second. Let's see if I'm. Oh no, not yet. Okay. Because that's pretty much sums up his work in South Africa. So he meets with the ruler, his name is Smuts of South Africa, and he goes, Gandhi, we're not going to put you in jail anymore on the condition that you leave. And he was also in touch with a lot of things that were happening in India. And there was a call for him. He's been communicating with people and strategizing with people in India. And he said, okay, it's time for me to go to India. So he's built up this philosophy, he's built up this experience. So before we continue, and I'd like to go back to these, where is that again? Up. There. Oh, I'm not there yet. All right. Thoughts about, you have any questions or thoughts about that whole, what he's developed over time? Yes,
I have two questions.
Sure.
I'm not sure that they are connected to each other.
it's all right.
He went to South Africa of his own accord because of the injustices that he's thought were going on there.
No. Oh, we went to South Africa? No. He's tried to establish a practice in India and he was doing very well. And
The law,
what's that?
the law thing.
Yeah. And so he was commissioned, he had a request to go to South Africa for this one particular case. And I think it was a Muslim Indian who was living in South Africa. And he said, you know, here's this, I have this suit. I don't remember the details of it. And he was successful and he was good. And he found at the same time, the whole community started saying, well, you know, you did this pretty well. You know, so would you do it for me? So he found himself getting more enmeshed in the whole political scene there, the legal scene there. And his success was so good that he decided to set up his practice. I know I have a picture of that somewhere. Maybe I don't need to have it, but it's kind of a nice picture of him and his gang, his staff. There they are. There he is in the middle, looking very spiffy.
I do recall that now. And one other question, when you had the two charts of Indian versus British or Western,
Yeah.
my question is I don't know that much about Indian history. And a lot of the goddess, either female, talking about female virtues, were women, real women in general, held to on a higher esteem than they were in the Western world?
Probably not. I mean, you know, I can't really speak to Indian society as such. I think there was a certain, the feminine was a value, but at the same time, you know, my question would be, and again, Indian culture is so complex. I think it's safe to say that the entire world, until recently, females had a role that was subordinate and was limited, and it was a segregated kind of experience, and we're still seeing it even here. But the principle, and this is Gandhi's, what Gandhi did in England was to kind of synthesize all kinds of thought, and he reinterpreted Hinduism in a way that wasn't strictly Hindu. So the fact that he included untouchables in his ashram was not very, I mean, in fact, as we'll see, he was assassinated by a Hindu ultra nationalist who didn't think he, anyway, is that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me your name again.
Sally,
Sally. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, certainly, I mean, it looks like female virtues is a very different thing from the status of women. I mean, if he told his wife that she had to do as he did,
Right.
Whether it was latrines or sex, clearly he felt, I mean, he was a man of principle.
Yes.
And so if he made her be a woman of principle in his eyes, clearly she was held to, I mean, she was clearly inferior socially. I mean, that tells you everything right there,
Yeah.
you know.
I think that's one way of looking at it. Yeah. I mean,
He wasn't cruel, I mean, he wasn't exceptional in his view of women.
yeah. Yeah. It's really, it's difficult to interpret other cultures in the context of our own. I mean, but I think it's fair to say, and I think I said that already, is that, you know, the role of women universally has been relegated to a certain role of nurturing, of following, and her, you know, she basically committed herself to following him. And that wasn't something that she didn't, you know, she didn't agree with. But like in the film, she goes, "Don't you have any respect for me to make me clean the toilet?" You know, he goes, and he was torn, but he says, "You know, this is what we're doing here. This is part of my commitment. The key to this whole movement is inclusiveness and being able to get beyond the traditional limitations of our culture. And so if you can't do that, then you're not, so I'm not doing it for me. I mean, that would be his rationalization.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, it was natural. Go ahead.
To say, but from a couple of the slides, like the farm and his law firm, there were women in both those pictures. So I'm wondering, what was the purpose of the farm? Was it just to well, just that you said there was more than one farm too. Apparently he did farms in
Well,
India.
he changed it, he expanded it, and it became more in focus. But yeah, it was just another version of that.
Other women, except for his wife. In other words, he seemed to have women in both.
Oh,
the
yeah.
law firm and the farm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he had a lot of women followers. In fact, that, you know, there were people who went, you know, accompanied him and were, yeah, there's, in the film, you can see there's a, I forget where she's from, I think German woman who becomes her, and, you know, to come to his farm and live with him, he's the leader. So they come, but he, and again, I think it's a good point, is that he valued the female principle, and he also valued, in a certain sense, and this becomes controversial, very strange, but, you know, there's a whole sexual thing that's an integral part of the discipline. And after he decided to stop being sexual with his wife, one of the things that he did was that he had a lot of young women were there. He would spend the night with a woman. He would sleep in his bed, and, you know, and he would do that especially on the eve of particular difficult demonstration he was going to, because to him that was to discipline that level of his humanity, was to strengthen his will, you might say, or he strengthened his ability to be detached.
He slept with them without touching them. Is that what you're saying?
No, he didn't have sex with them. In fact, my friend Dennis Dalton actually met one of these women because he spent time in India, and he's like 87. So he, you know, when he was in his 30s, so he met one of these women. She said he would, you know, that she would get in bed with him and he would just cling to her because he was so cold. But I mean, it was nothing sexual, but he, you know, he wanted to keep warm. But you see the point that sexuality is so deep and it's so powerful that for him to overcome that in such close proximity was in itself a spiritual exercise.
So was he testing himself?
Yeah, that would be a way of putting it. Yeah. Yeah. But he was, you know, by that time, so right, he was reinforcing that kind of, so the idea that, you know, you have this implacable center that's resistant to lust, to fear, And these are related. So if you're, so he becomes, people would say he's fearless. And it's interesting because as a young man, he was considered very timid and very, very much afraid. And the same is true of Martin Luther King. He was very neurotic and very, very fearful. And both of them developed fearlessness. Anyway, that's a little off topic. Does that, okay. Yeah,
I just wanted to comment that cultures often revere women, but only if they're submissive and
right,
go along with
absolutely.
what the male.
Yeah. Sure. Women, we love women. And so, right,
Yeah.
that was an argument against women's suffrage. We don't want you girls to get dirty in politics, so stay out of it. Right. Yeah.
It's ironic that I'm teaching a course on Southern literature starting Wednesday. And the white masters in the South had their wives on pedestals called them the angel in the house. It all comes from Victoriana, but yet with the women of color and the slaves, they had these illicit relationships and, children and
Sure.
et cetera. And all the things that they couldn't do morally with their wives, they did with these other women. But Gandhi just slept with them without any sex.
Oh, yeah. It was the spirit. Are you familiar with there's a kind of Hinduism called Kundalini. Are you familiar with that? So Kundalini yoga is a yoga where people don't have their clothes on and they strike a yoga pose and the woman is embracing the man and they, there's no intercourse, I think. But the idea is that there's this sexual energy that if you engage sexual energy but don't express it, it gives you power because the power is internalized. That's the theory. And so it's similar kind of thing. So to engage a sexual impulse or sexual, what do I want to say, stimulus, and not engage it sexually is a way of increasing power. Because if you can withstand that, you must be pretty impressive. I mean, does that make sense? I mean, so that's the theory. But yeah, I mean, what do you want to say?
But it doesn't make sense. Ask the Catholic Church. Really, seriously, it's not.
No, that's the, yeah. Well,
That's the point.
right. Well, yeah. But that's not the discipline that the priests go through. They don't practice. They say, don't even think about it. Don't even look at them. And of course, I mean, that's a great example of the lack of this. I mean, the Catholic Church, everywhere you go, is rampant with sexual abuse. That's not a coincidence. But there's no focus on, like, God, God. Oh, all practices are subject to abuse, but his discipline was very much with that in mind. And so, and he was criticized for it. I mean, the image wasn't very good. People, you're sleeping with a young woman. Well, I mean, he was unorthodox in his practices. But I agree with you, but I mean, part of, I mentioned this to someone, if you've heard, there's a great PBS documentary called One Woman, One Vote, about women's suffrage in the United States. I mean, women didn't get the vote till 1920. And there were women who were protesting sometimes violently, but they weren't messing around. They were, and they were arrested. Woodrow Wilson had them arrested, and then they went on hunger strikes and they force fed them. Right. And they were, it was, so, that's, so this whole idea of living up to the proclamation of the Declaration of Independence, women are central to that. That's one of the things that has to be remediated. Anyway. Any other comments or questions? What time do we have? About 3 minutes, something.
This abstinence, chastity, whatever you want to call it, without the discipline and the philosophy that he obviously was using to control himself.
Yeah.
On the other hand, with somebody who didn't have access to that philosophy, that abstinence could also come out in violence section. I would think
Yeah, it could also come out what?
in sexual violence. I mean, if somebody just abstained because without the philosophy would
Oh,
never,
sure.
Gandhi was
Yeah.
training himself to
Yeah.
think and do it.
Well, I think that's kind of what that you're referring to the Catholic Church too. That the discipline,
You get power.
right. Oh, of course.
Of
Of course.
Use it to.
Oh, yeah.
I never even thought of that with the abuse. It's
Yeah.
power over the younger person.
Sure. Well, I mean, the whole power differential. I mean, one of the things that I experienced in my teaching is there was a whole scandal of professors who were having sex with their students because oh boy, Professor so and so. I mean, sexual attraction is it needs some kind of what do I want to say, safety. I had a lot of Muslim students and they were criticized for women covering themselves and we had a discussion with a number of students and the men were telling me that what they're instructed to do when a woman is approaching is that they need to look down. They're not supposed to be staring at women, looking at them. I mean, that's, so how do we, is that something that we can't manage it? Things are, how do we deal with that in this culture? Because that's part of the manipulation of what goes on in politics and everything else. As far as self-rule, how do you do that in a culture that has no boundaries on that level? And I don't know, but anyway, any other questions, final questions? Well, thank you for that. I hope that was interesting to you. It's just the beginning. Was a lot of stuff going up. Next week, we want to, we'll talk about Gandhi's entry into Indian politics, and we'll see a 25-minute film of Gandhi's Salt March, which is really pretty amazing. A lot of commentary on it too. So thank you again. See you next time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure, you're welcome.